Some men become legends not because of what they did, but because of what others feared they could do. In the deep South, amid the endless rows of cotton on Georgia's plantations, there lived a man who moved through locked doors as if they were nothing. No bolts, no guards, no barriers could stop him. The wealthy plantation owners, men who wielded power like iron, never dared to lay a hand on him. They never tried to stop him from entering their homes at night. Why? Because this wasn't simple luck or myth. It was something far darker, a power born not from magic, but from something terrifyingly real. Fear, control, secrets buried so deep that revealing them would shatter everything. His name was Elijah. You've never heard his story because the history books were written by those who feared him, those who lost control the moment he stepped inside their grand houses. He was not just a slave. He was a keeper of secrets, a master of shadows, a silent force no one could hold. His footsteps echoed through the halls while overseers and dogs slept soundly, oblivious or perhaps too scared to react. The doors, the locks, the rifles, all illusions of safety, powerless before Elijah's quiet certainty. It started with a single night, a night that would unravel a web of lies and corruption tied to the highest echelons of Southern society. A night when Elizabeth Hartley, the wife of a respected plantation owner, woke to the sound of her bedroom door closing, not opening. Her heart pounded. She knew the house was locked, guards posted outside. No one should have been inside. But there he was, a shadow at the foot of her bed, calm, silent, watching. Elijah spoke softly. "No need to scream, ma'am. I come with a message. A message that would expose crimes so vile, so carefully hidden, that their revelation could topple men who called themselves pillars of the community." He placed a leather-bound journal on her dresser, evidence of smuggling, corruption, murder, the darkest trade this country ever tried to bury. This was no ghost story. This was the truth. And the man who held it was no ordinary slave. He was the key to a cage built from greed and silence, and the one man who could unlock it all. The first time anyone truly noticed Elijah's unusual freedom was on a humid August night in 1857. Elizabeth Hartley woke to the faint, unsettling sound of her bedroom door closing. Not opening, closing. The house was old, sure, and it creaked in the summer heat, but something in that moment told her this was no ordinary noise. Her heart slammed against her ribs as a cold certainty took hold. Someone was in the room. Richard Hartley, her husband, a respected plantation owner, was miles away on business in Savannah. The entire house had been locked and bolted before the household retired. Overseers armed with rifles patrol the grounds. Dogs trained to tear apart any slave found outside the quarters after dark. The security was tight, or so they believed. But Elijah stood silently at the foot of Elizabeth's bed, a dark silhouette framed by the thin moonlight filtering through drawn curtains. Still, watching, not threatening, but utterly present. Frozen by terror, Elizabeth's hand crept toward the bell pull, the cord that would summon help, guns and men rushing to her rescue. Just inches away, her fingers trembled when Elijah's calm voice stopped her. "No need for that, ma'am," he said quietly, respectfully. The voice was calm, even gentle, and somehow that made it worse. It was the voice of a man who belonged there, in that room at that hour. "My name is Elijah. I work your husband's fields. I have something for you." His hand reached into the fine coat he wore beneath the shadows, a coat far too fine for a field hand, and he carefully placed a leather-bound journal on her dresser. Mr. Hartley left this at the Parker Hotel in Savannah. Thought you'd want to see it before he returned. Elizabeth stared at the journal, at the proof of secrets too terrible to imagine. How had he gotten in? How did he know? But Elijah was already turning toward the door. Sometimes, he said, his hand on the doorknob. Doors open for people who know where the keys are kept. And sometimes those who should keep them locked forget that their servants know more than they let on. The hinges made no sound as he stepped out. She heard footsteps descend the grand staircase. The front door opened softly, then closed behind him. And just like that, Elijah was gone, as if he'd never been there. Elizabeth sat frozen in her bed, the leather journal heavy in her hands. She barely dared to breathe, the silence around her thick with the weight of what she now held. Proof that shattered everything she thought she knew about her husband, Richard Hartley. The first page she opened was dated March 1845. Her husband's neat handwriting sprawled across the yellowed parchment, detailing a meeting with powerful men. Joshua Harper, Franklin Bradford, William Patterson, Judge Marcus Kent. Names she recognized, men who shaped the fate of their county. They weren't just business partners. They were conspirators in a dark venture, the Georgia coastal venture. As Elizabeth read deeper, the pages grew darker. References to shipments, cargo, and a Captain Williams with a ship called the Nightingale. Payments to customs officials, harbor masters, even sheriffs, all hush money. Smuggling people, human souls stolen from Africa, in violation of every law, treaty, and morality they pretended to uphold. The entry dated July 1845 revealed the horror in brutal clarity. The Nightingale arrived with 247 souls aboard. 31 died during the crossing. The survivors were sold under false names to buyers in Charleston and New Orleans. The profits were enormous, $80,000 after expenses, and the men behind it grew rich while the world turned a blind eye. Elizabeth's hand shook as she turned page after page, reading the ledger of crimes committed in her own backyard, crimes that could cost men their lives. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a weapon, a key to dismantling an empire built on blood and silence. But the question that haunted her was not how her husband had done this. It was how Elijah, a slave bound by chains and laws, had gotten his hands on the journal. Why had he risked everything to deliver it to her? And most terrifying of all, what did he want in return? Outside the window, the first light of dawn stained the cotton fields pink. Slaves were already stirring, bound to begin another day of forced labor. And Elizabeth, caught between horror and resolve, knew her life would never be the same. Because the man who walked freely through locked doors was not just a servant. He was a reckoning. When the household stirred the next morning, Elizabeth ordered every door checked, every window latched, every lock inspected. Every entry point was secured exactly as it had been the night before. Locked tight, bolts slid home, shutters fastened. The overseers on patrol reported nothing unusual. The dogs barked once around midnight, then fell silent. No sign of intruders. Yet Elijah had been inside her room. He had stood at the foot of her bed, spoken to her, placed that journal on her dresser, then vanished into the morning shadows as if he owned the place. The truth was far worse than any ghost story or legend. Elijah wasn't simply a man who slipped past guards or picked locks. He was a symbol of power no one dared confront, a living reminder that the chains of slavery were not just physical, but psychological. When Richard returned from Savannah, 3 days later, Elizabeth was ready. She laid the leather journal on his desk after dinner, the silence between them thicker than the Georgia's summer air. Richard's face drained of color when he saw it. His hands trembled as the amber brandy spilled across the desk, the liquid pooling like the lies they'd built their lives upon. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "A man named Elijah brought it to me," Elizabeth said steadily. "In our bedroom at night." For the first time in their 15 years of marriage, Richard looked afraid, truly afraid. "Elijah was in our house? In our bedroom? Placing this on your dresser?" His voice cracked, haunted. Richard collapsed into his chair, the weight of the secret breaking him. "I read it all," he confessed. "Every page." Elizabeth's voice was cold, precise. "You smuggled human beings. You broke federal law. You could be hanged for this." He buried his face in his hands. "Then explain to me how a slave has this journal, how he got in, and why you haven't had him killed to protect yourself." Because Elijah wasn't just a slave. He was the only one holding the truth that could bring down every man involved in the Georgia coastal venture. And no one could stop him. Richard's voice was barely a whisper when he said it. "I can't kill him. None of us can." He looked up, eyes hollow, haunted by the invisible noose tightening around their necks. "You own him, Elizabeth. You could, but we don't dare." Elijah had made copies of the journal, multiple copies, hidden away where no one knew. If anything happened to him, if he disappeared, was sold off, or worse, those copies would be sent straight to the federal authorities, to northern newspapers, to the British government. The very powers hunting slave smugglers. It was a psychological chokehold none of the conspirators had ever expected. "We are prisoners of our own crimes," Richard confessed bitterly. "And the man who holds the keys is a slave." Elizabeth sank into a chair, the weight of that truth crushing her spirit. How many men know about this? Maybe 15. The conspirators. And Elijah. Who is Elijah? She demanded. Why was he entrusted with your crimes? Richard explained. Elijah had come on the second voyage, 1845. Unlike most slaves, Elijah was educated, taught to read and write in Africa before capture. His intelligence and meticulous nature made him perfect for the task of record keeping. The men thought they could control him. They thought slavery was enough to bind him to their will. They were wrong. Elijah had used that education as a weapon. He kept 2 sets of books, one for the conspirators to divide profits, and one secret ledger revealing the full, brutal truth. The names, the numbers, the dead and the living, the bribes, the betrayals. 9 years they lived in the shadow of that ledger. 9 years they lived in fear of Elijah, the slave who could enter any house at night, unchallenged. For 9 years, Elijah moved through a world designed to keep him powerless, through fields soaked with sweat and pain, behind the rough walls of slave quarters, beneath the weight of a system built to break men like him. Yet, when night fell, something changed. Elijah became a ghost among the powerful, a silent force who held the fate of an entire county in his hands. He still worked the fields like any other slave, his hands blistered and scarred from the relentless toil. He lived in a leaky cabin, ate the same meager rations, and slept on a hard cot. To anyone watching, Elijah was just another face in the crowd, another body bent beneath the sun. But 3 nights a week, when the sky turned black and the overseers returned to their posts, Elijah donned a coat, stolen years ago from the cruel William Patterson's own closet, and walked straight to the main house. He did not hurry, nor did he hide. His gait was steady, confident, the path from quarters to mansion his own. The overseer saw him. The guards saw him. The dogs barked and snarled, yet no one stopped him. No one dared. He entered the grand homes of the men who ruled this land with the quiet authority of violence and money. He stayed only moments, 10, 15 minutes, enough to remind those men that he existed beyond their control. The first time an overseer named Dutch tried to block his way, rifle raised, Elijah stopped and looked him in the eye. "Mr. Patterson is expecting me," Elijah said calmly. Dutch threatened, shouted, but Elijah's voice held a terrible certainty. "Before you shoot me, go ahead. See what happens next." Dutch lowered his rifle, trembling. The fear in Elijah's eyes was not weakness. It was absolute power. It was the power of a man who owned the darkest secrets, the power of a man who had nothing left to lose. Those visits were a demonstration, a psychological weapon designed to unravel the fortress of silence the conspirators had built around their crimes. The message was clear. Elijah could come and go as he pleased, and if anyone tried to stop him, they risked triggering a reckoning that would consume them all. But beneath Elijah's cold control was another, deeper fear. The chains that bound him may have been physical, but the chains in his mind were far heavier. He carried the burden of knowing what true power was and what it demanded. Elijah's power was not born from violence or brute strength. It was forged in knowledge and the terrifying leverage that knowledge granted him over the men who believed themselves untouchable. These plantation owners, judges, sheriffs, pillars of their communities, lived with a secret so damning they guarded it with lies and blood. And Elijah held the key to their destruction. Every day, these men walked freely under the sun, dressed in fine clothes, attended church services, and held meetings behind closed doors. But beneath their polished surfaces, they were prisoners of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of justice, fear of Elijah. He was a shadow on their conscience, a constant reminder that no lock, no gun, no law could keep him out. The psychological warfare Elijah waged was as brutal as any whip. It broke down their confidence, made them second-guess every decision, every alliance. And yet, Elijah himself was haunted. The freedom he wielded was a double-edged sword, a crown of thorns worn in silence. Each visit to the grand houses was a walk through a minefield of danger. One misstep, one whisper to the wrong person, and the entire fragile balance would shatter. He knew the cost if he fell: death, exile, or worse. But Elijah's fight was not just against his former masters. It was against the system itself, the entire machinery of oppression that turned human lives into property, profits, and secrets. His defiance was a flicker of rebellion in a world smothered by control. While the white families lived in terror of what Elijah might reveal, he lived in a different kind of fear, a fear born from the loneliness of holding the truth. Every secret ledger, every name recorded, was a burden. Each visit to the mansions, every silent confrontation, reminded him of the price of knowledge. He had power over the conspirators, yes, but he was still a slave, chained by law, by threat, by the relentless weight of history. The irony was cruel and absolute. The man who could unlock the prisons of others remained locked himself. And so, Elijah walked between two worlds, the fields by day, the shadowed halls by night. A ghost haunting a dark secret no one dared speak aloud. Elijah's secret journeys through the plantation homes were more than just acts of defiance. They were a calculated message, a living testament to the power of knowledge over brute force. Each time he stepped into a grand house, he shattered the illusion of control that plantation owners clung to like a lifeline. It wasn't just the physical act of entering locked doors or evading armed guards. It was the quiet assertion that these men's power had limits. The chains that bound Elijah's body could not restrain his mind or his influence. In every silent step, Elijah rewrote the rules of control, revealing that power is fragile when built on fear and lies. His fine coat, stolen from Patterson's closet, was a symbol, a subtle yet profound challenge to the established order. It marked him as more than a field hand. It marked him as a man who had stolen back a fragment of dignity from a system designed to strip it away. Every thread in that coat was a stitch in the fabric of his rebellion. Those who saw Elijah pass knew better than to interfere. The overseers and guards, men who enforced the brutal codes of slavery with rifles and whips, felt a chilling uncertainty whenever Elijah approached. His calm confidence unsettled them. It suggested a power beyond their understanding or control. Yet behind the scenes, the conspirators lived in a constant state of paranoia. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously whenever Elijah's name was mentioned. The journal, that leather-bound ledger of horrors, was both their Achilles heel and their curse. Elizabeth Hartley, once sheltered in ignorance, now bore witness to the cracks in the facade. Her world had been shattered by the knowledge Elijah delivered. She understood that this was not just a personal betrayal by her husband, but the unraveling of a system built on deceit. The truth Elijah carried was dangerous. It threatened to dismantle the very foundation of Southern society. And that made Elijah both a target and a ghost, hunted and untouchable. In the shadows of the plantation, under the oppressive gaze of a world unwilling to face its sins, Elijah moved like a force of reckoning. He was the unexpected master of a secret that could bring kings to their knees. And the deeper the secret, the darker the price for those who tried to silence him. The psychology of power is a cruel game, one built on fear, submission, and the illusion of control. The plantation owners believed their dominance was absolute, their authority unquestionable. But Elijah proved them wrong every night. He stepped inside their homes not just as a trespasser, but as a master of their deepest fears. Elijah's presence was a silent, persistent threat. He didn't need to shout or strike. His mere existence inside those grand walls was enough to unsettle even the most ruthless men. They knew he held the truth that could dismantle their lives, destroy their reputations, and hang them all by the noose of justice. Each time Elijah walked through the gates, he reminded them that power is fragile. The rifles and whips were meaningless against the shadow of knowledge he carried. It was psychological control at its most devastating form, a reversal of roles where the enslaved man became the unseen jailer. And yet, Elijah bore a weight far heavier than theirs. The ledger he protected was not just a book. It was a living record of pain, betrayal, and broken souls. Every name inscribed was a life stolen, every figure a testament to suffering. To carry this knowledge was to carry a burden no man should bear. The plantation's fields were stained with blood and tears, and Elijah felt their weight every day. He labored under the sun, his body beaten and broken, even as his mind plotted a quiet revolution. The irony was bitter. His chains were visible, but his true power was invisible and far more potent. Fear kept Elijah alive, but it was not the fear of his masters. It was the fear of what would happen if the truth came out, if the fragile balance tipped, if the world was forced to confront its own darkness. Yet, with every secret visit, every silent warning, Elijah edged closer to a reckoning. The men who thought themselves untouchable lived with trembling hearts, knowing one day their world could collapse. And when it did, Elijah would be waiting, the man who could enter any house at night, the slave who owned the darkest secrets. Elijah's story is not just about rebellion. It's about the corrosive nature of secrets and the invisible chains that bind even the most powerful. The men who ruled the plantations believed that wealth and status shielded them from consequence. But Elijah's silent presence shattered that illusion. Each visit to the grand houses was a reminder that truth is the ultimate weapon, and it cannot be locked away or silenced. The journal he carried wasn't just evidence. It was a mirror reflecting the corruption at the heart of their society. Inside those homes, the conspirators played their roles perfectly. Smiling faces, polite conversation, unshakable confidence. But behind closed doors, their smiles faded, their voices dropped, and their hands trembled at the thought of Elijah's next appearance. The psychology of control is subtle. It's not only about physical dominance, but about maintaining fear, suspicion, and distrust. Elijah wielded that power masterfully, walking into rooms where men sat with guns on their laps, knowing that any attempt to stop him would unravel everything. Yet, while Elijah's power was undeniable, his position remained precarious. Slaves lived in a constant state of vulnerability, their lives weighed against the whims of those who claimed ownership. Elijah's freedom to move among his oppressors was a dangerous exception, a fragile thread holding together a terrifying balance. That balance could break at any moment. One wrong move, one act of desperation, and the carefully maintained order would collapse. Elijah was always aware of this, but he never showed fear. Instead, he carried himself with the calm certainty of a man who understood the stakes and was willing to pay any price. But there was something else lurking beneath Elijah's resolve, a deep, unspoken pain. The cost of knowledge was not just fear or danger, it was isolation. To hold such a secret meant living apart from everyone else, unable to share the burden, unable to trust. He was both the hunter and the hunted, trapped in a role no one wanted, but one he accepted with grim determination. Elijah knew his story could change the world, or end it, and that knowledge was the heaviest chain of all. Elijah's existence was a paradox. To the world, he was a slave, owned, controlled, broken by law and violence. Yet, in the shadows of those oppressive walls, he was the unchallenged master of secrets so dangerous it shook the foundations of power itself. The plantation owner's greatest fear was not rebellion with weapons, but rebellion with knowledge. A rebellion Elijah carried quietly in his hands. That knowledge had been earned through unimaginable suffering and sacrifice. Elijah had witnessed horrors that no man should ever endure. The tearing apart of families, the merciless cruelty of overseers, the silence of a society complicit in brutality. But from that darkness, he forged a weapon, a ledger chronicling crimes too terrible for the public eye. His ability to read and write, rare among slaves, became the key to his survival and power. The conspirators had thought education was a tool to bind him closer, a way to exploit his skills for their gain. Instead, it became a chain he broke, the very instrument he used to hold them hostage. Each secret visit was a test of courage, a gamble with death. Elijah walked calmly through hallways filled with opulence and sin, knowing that at any moment, his defiance could be met with bullets or ropes. But his fear was not of death. It was the burden of carrying truth in a world built on lies. Elijah's nightly missions became a symbol of resistance, a whispered legend among slaves and masters alike. No one could explain how he moved with such freedom, how he passed through locked doors and guarded gates without consequence. Some said he had made a pact with spirits. Others believed he possessed a curse. But the reality was far darker and more profound. Elijah's power came from knowing the darkest secrets and having the will to expose them. He was a living threat, not because of what he could destroy with force, but because of what he already held in his hands. The plantation owner's silence was not submission, it was terror. They understood that the price of silence was their own survival. And Elijah's watchful presence was a reminder that power is never absolute, especially when the truth waits quietly in the shadows. The delicate balance between terror and control defined every interaction Elijah had with his former masters. Behind the veneer of civility, the plantation owners were haunted by the knowledge that Elijah could shatter their carefully constructed worlds with a single revelation. And yet, they were powerless to stop him. Elijah's freedom to enter their homes was not granted. It was a silent, uneasy truce born of fear and respect. The men understood that to challenge him outright risked unraveling everything. The stakes were too high. The ledger he guarded was more than ink and leather. It was a ticking time bomb, loaded with every name, every bribe, every death. The psychological warfare Elijah waged was devastating. His presence alone was an unspoken accusation, a constant reminder that justice had not been served and might never be. The plantation owners lived in a perpetual state of dread, their lives dictated by a man they considered property, but who wielded the power of kings. In the slave quarters, whispers of Elijah's nightly journey spread like wildfire. He became a mythic figure, a ghost who defied chains and laws, a man who walked among oppressors without fear. For those enslaved, Elijah was a symbol of hope and quiet rebellion, proof that power could be reclaimed even in the darkest circumstances. But Elijah's power came at a price. The burden of knowledge isolated him from everyone, even those he wished to protect. He carried the weight of countless souls crushed beneath the machinery of greed and cruelty. Every secret he kept was a wound, every ledger entry a reminder of lives lost. And yet, Elijah never wavered. His resolve was steel forged in fire. He knew that the truth he held could topple empires, but it could also destroy him. The path he walked was razor thin, balanced between liberation and annihilation. This was no ordinary man. Elijah was a force of nature, a reckoning embodied in flesh and bone. He was the slave who could enter any house at night, and no one, not even the most powerful plantation owner, dared stop him. The conspiracy that Elijah held in his hands was more than a ledger. It was a map of a rotten empire built on betrayal, greed, and cruelty. Names of prominent men who disguised their monstrous deeds behind titles and wealth filled those pages. Judges who sold justice, sheriffs who turned blind eyes, merchants who trafficked human lives for profit. Each entry was a testament to the systemic corruption that thrived under the guise of civilization. Elijah's role as the keeper of these secrets was both a gift and a curse. It gave him a power no slave had ever known, but it also made him a prisoner. He was trapped in a dangerous game where the stakes were life and death, a silent sentinel guarding a truth that could ignite revolution or destruction. Despite the constant threat, Elijah moved with unwavering determination. Each visit to the mansions was a calculated risk, a performance of control in a theater of terror. He didn't need to raise a weapon or shout commands. His quiet confidence was enough to unnerve the most hardened conspirators. They lived with the knowledge that Elijah could pull the strings that bound them, that he held the power to bring ruin with a single revelation. The plantation owner's strategy was simple: maintain the fragile peace, avoid confrontation, and hope Elijah would tire or be silenced by fate. But Elijah was neither naive nor fragile. He understood the depth of their desperation and the lengths they would go to protect their secrets. Beneath his calm exterior was a man who had endured unimaginable suffering, yet refused to bow. His defiance was a beacon to those enslaved, a reminder that even in the darkest places, resistance was possible. But it was also a warning that the truth carried a price heavier than chains. For Elijah, the ledger was not just a record of crimes. It was a call to justice, a silent vow to expose the darkness no matter the cost. The nights he spent walking through the grand houses were more than journeys. They were acts of rebellion, statements of power that shook the foundations of a corrupt world. And with every step, Elijah edged closer to a reckoning that would change everything. Elijah's presence inside the homes of the powerful was more than a physical act. It was a spiritual confrontation. Each time he stepped across the threshold, he entered a domain where lies and hypocrisy thrived. These houses were monuments to greed and cruelty, built on the backs of countless broken souls, and Elijah was their uninvited witness. The men who owned these plantations were masters of deception. They wore their wealth like armor, hiding behind elaborate facades of respectability. They preached sermons of morality in churches while orchestrating human trafficking and corruption in the shadows. But Elijah saw through their masks. He held the proof that shattered their carefully constructed lies. Elizabeth Hartley's discovery of the journal was a turning point, a crack in the foundation that threatened to expose everything. It was Elijah's silent rebellion made tangible, a weapon of truth delivered into the hands of those caught in the web of deceit. She realized, too late, that the power Elijah wielded was not just about control, it was about awakening. The plantation owner's compliance with Elijah's nightly visits was born not of respect, but of terror. To confront him meant risking exposure, public disgrace, and the collapse of their world. So, they endured his intrusion, swallowed their fear, and pretended it was normal. But beneath their composure, panic festered like a poison. Elijah, meanwhile, carried the weight of history. He was more than a man. He was a symbol of the unbreakable human spirit. His defiance transcended the physical chains that bound him. It was a rebellion of the mind and soul, an assertion that even in the darkest corners, light can be found. Yet this power came at cost. Elijah was isolated, surrounded by enemies disguised as masters and allies alike. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. Every step he took was measured, every word carefully chosen. One mistake could mean death or disappearance, erased without a trace. But Elijah's resolve never wavered. He knew the stakes, and he accepted them. The secret he guarded was a seed of revolution, a force that could topple empires and rewrite history. And he was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. The plantation was a world divided between the visible and the invisible, the powerful and the powerless, the spoken and the silenced. Elijah lived at the intersection of these worlds, moving unseen through corridors of power while carrying the heavy burden of truths that could shatter it all. His nightly journeys were a form of psychological warfare, but they were also a desperate act of survival. Every step he took was a silent defiance against a system designed to erase him and people like him from history. He wasn't just a slave. He was a guardian of a secret so explosive it could ignite the tinderbox of rebellion across the South. The conspirators, men who fancied themselves invincible, lived in a state of suspended terror. They watched their backs, listened for whispers, and feared the day Elijah might decide to unleash the ledger's contents on the world. That ledger was a Pandora's box. Once opened, it would reveal the depths of their corruption, the true cost of their fortune, and the countless lives they destroyed. Elijah's power was a paradox. The very men who enslaved him had unwittingly armed him with the tools of his dominance: literacy, trust, and access. They thought they were manipulating him, but he was the one manipulating them, turning their greed and fear against them in a silent, calculated rebellion. And yet, beneath his calm exterior, Elijah bore the scars of his reality. The constant danger, the isolation, and the weight of his mission carved deep wounds into his soul. He lived in the shadows of a world that refused to see him as fully human. Yet he carried the flame of justice like a torch in the night. His story was a warning, a reminder that the greatest chains are often invisible and that true power lies in knowledge and courage. Elijah's silent footsteps echoed through history as proof that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with violence, but with a quiet, unyielding truth. The men who feared him were not just afraid of exposure. They feared the unraveling of a world built on lies. And Elijah, the slave who could enter any house at night, was the key to that unraveling. Every night, as the plantation fell into silence, Elijah became a ghost in a house of horrors, a silent witness to the hypocrisy and brutality masked by grand porches and polished floors. The plantation owners who ruled this world with iron fists believed themselves untouchable, but Elijah was their reckoning, the shadow they could neither catch nor ignore. His ability to walk through locked doors was no mere trick. It was a manifestation of a deeper truth. He held the power of secrets. Secrets so dark that exposing them would not only destroy individual lives, but topple an entire system built on blood and betrayal. Elijah's presence was a living indictment, a mirror held up to their sins. The ledger he carried was a sacred text of exposure. Each name was a thread that, when pulled, would unravel decades of corruption. The smuggling rings, the bribed officials, the hidden profits made from human suffering. It was a record of atrocities carefully hidden in plain sight, guarded by fear and silence. The conspirators' silent acceptance of Elijah's nightly visits was a pact forged in terror. No shot was fired, no whip cracked, because they understood that some chains could not be reinforced by violence. Elijah's control was psychological, a dominion built on fear, knowledge, and the unspoken threat of exposure. But Elijah's power was not absolute. His life was a constant risk, balanced on the edge of discovery and death. To carry such a secret was to walk a tightrope over an abyss. One misstep could mean his end, or worse, the loss of the ledger that was the cornerstone of his silent war. Behind his calm demeanor was a man who bore the scars of countless betrayals, a man who carried the weight of thousands of broken lives. Yet he never faltered. His resolve was an unbreakable flame, fueled by the desire to see justice done and truth revealed. Elijah was not just a slave, he was a force of reckoning. The man who could enter any house at night, unchallenged and unseen. The living embodiment of a secret no one dared confront, but everyone feared. The power Elijah wielded was not forged from weapons or numbers, but from something far more dangerous: knowledge and will. The men who controlled the plantations, cloaked in their titles and wealth, underestimated the force of a single truth kept in silence. A truth Elijah carried every night through their doors, unafraid, unbroken. Each visit was a reminder that the foundations of their world rested on lies, violence, and complicity. They whispered about Elijah in hushed tones, a ghost who defied chains, a shadow moving through walls. But what they didn't see was the calculated mind behind that calm facade, the intelligence that had turned slavery's cruelty into leverage. The ledger was Elijah's silent weapon, a map of corruption and crimes that connected the powerful in a web of mutual destruction. Its pages held the story of smuggling operations, bribed officials, and silent agreements made in dark corners. It was a truth so devastating that the very mention of it sent ripples through the county's elite. But Elijah's mission was more than just survival or revenge. It was a reckoning, a demand that justice be served in a world that had long turned a blind eye. He understood the cost of his defiance. His nights were filled with danger, and his days with relentless toil. But his spirit remained unyielding, a beacon of resistance in a land shrouded by oppression. His story became a whispered legend among slaves, a spark of hope that even the most brutal chains could be challenged. Yet, with every secret visit, Elijah walked a fine line. One misstep could mean death, or worse, the loss of the ledger that held their fate. The men who feared him understood this truth. Their silence was not respect, but calculated fear. Fear of exposure, fear of ruin, fear of a revolution ignited by a single man armed with forbidden knowledge. Elijah was a living paradox, a slave with the power to control masters, a ghost in the halls of power, and the keeper of a secret that could change everything. His steps echoed through the night, a haunting reminder that no fortress is impregnable when truth is the weapon. Elijah's nights were a slow-burning rebellion. Each silent step through those plantation homes was a testament to a truth that no man dared to face openly. The ledger he guarded was more than paper and ink. It was a chronicle of systemic corruption, cruelty, and betrayal that ran deep through every corner of the county's elite. The conspirators, men who ruled with arrogance and violence, wore their fear like a hidden wound. They saw Elijah not as a slave, but as a force beyond their control, a symbol of a power they could neither destroy nor fully comprehend. Their silence was a fragile truce, a desperate gamble to keep their empire from crumbling. Elijah, however, bore his burden with quiet dignity. He was acutely aware of the precariousness of his position, the razor-thin margin between survival and destruction. Yet he never wavered. Every visit was a reaffirmation of his resolve, an assertion that knowledge was mightier than the whip and courage deeper than chains. The psychological grip Elijah held over the conspirators was profound. His presence alone was a reminder that beneath their polished veneers lay a foundation of lies and blood. They lived in constant dread, knowing that the ledger he protected could expose every hidden sin and secret deal. In the quarters, the enslaved whispered tales of Elijah's courage, a man who moved through the enemy's domain like a ghost, unbroken and unafraid. To them, he was more than a man. He was a beacon of resistance, proof that even the most brutal systems could be challenged. But Elijah's strength came at a cost. The isolation of his secret, the constant threat of discovery, weighed heavily on him. He knew that the ledger was not just a weapon. It was a responsibility that could change the fate of many, but also destroy him if it fell into the wrong hands. Yet, in the face of this burden, Elijah remained unshaken. His story was not just about survival. It was about awakening. An awakening to the dark truths hidden beneath the surface of power and the quiet, relentless fight to bring them to light. The ledger Elijah carried was a testament to the darkness hidden beneath polite society. It was a record of human lives reduced to commodities, bought and sold with calculated cruelty. Each name written within was more than ink. It was a story of broken families, stolen futures, and silent screams. Elijah's ability to navigate this deadly game was born from a unique blend of intelligence, courage, and necessity. Literacy was his sword, discretion his shield. The men who enslaved him thought they were training a tool, but they had forged a weapon instead, a weapon that could topple kings. His nightly visits to the homes of the conspirators were acts of quiet defiance, but also calculated strategy. He understood the weight of his power and wielded it with cold precision. The fear he instilled was not accidental. It was deliberate, a constant reminder that truth was a force no one could imprison. Yet Elijah's strength was tempered by a deep, personal torment. He carried the weight of countless lives torn apart by the very system he was bound to. The ledger was not just a ledger. It was a ledger of pain, of injustice, and a silent vow to seek justice, no matter the cost. The conspirators' fear was palpable. Their once unchallenged authority was now overshadowed by a ghost they could not cage. They had built their fortunes on cruelty and corruption, but Elijah's knowledge held the power to dismantle it all. But beyond the fear and tension lay a chilling realization. Elijah's defiance was more than survival. It was revolution. A revolution born not from violence, but from the undeniable force of exposed truth. He was rewriting the rules of power one silent visit at a time. And the world, still asleep, was unaware of the storm gathering at its edges. Elijah was the calm before the upheaval, a man who could enter any house at night and leave behind a trail of reckoning. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world seemed most asleep, Elijah became the embodiment of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. The plantation owners, masters of silence and suppression, trembled not from the lash, but from the knowledge that their darkest secrets were exposed by a man they could neither bind nor break. Elijah's power was psychological, an invisible dominion over those who believed themselves untouchable. His silent footsteps through their mansions were a haunting reminder that the foundation of their power was a lie. Every creak of the floorboard beneath his feet was a warning whispered in the dark. The ledger was real, the crimes undeniable, and the reckoning inevitable. Yet for Elijah, this power was a double-edged sword. He was a man walking a perilous tightrope, balanced between the need for justice and the survival instinct. The ledger was both his shield and his curse, a weapon that could bring liberation or destruction. One misstep could mean his death, or worse, the loss of the truth that could set thousands free. The conspirators' silence was a fragile truce maintained by fear and mutual self-preservation. They lived in constant dread, knowing that Elijah's knowledge was their undoing, but unable to act without risking the exposure that would destroy them all. For Elijah, each visit was more than a mission. It was a statement, a declaration that knowledge was power, and that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be challenged from within. His story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative force of truth. He was not just a slave who could enter any house at night. He was a living symbol of resistance, a ghost in the halls of power, and the keeper of a secret that could rewrite history. His footsteps echoed with the promise of change, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, the light of truth can never be fully extinguished. Elijah's story was not just about the past. It was a warning to every man who believed power was absolute. The ledger he guarded was a weapon against the corrupt, proof that even the most powerful can be brought low by the secrets they bury. It was a blueprint for revolution hidden in plain sight. The conspirators who lived in fear of Elijah knew the stakes all too well. Their world was built on silence and complicity, and the ledger was the crack that threatened to bring their empire crashing down. Every page held a secret worth killing for, every name a potential ruin. Elijah moved through their lives like a shadow, a reminder that no fortress is impregnable when the truth is the weapon. He was a master of psychological warfare, wielding silence, knowledge, and presence to keep his enemies off balance. His power was not loud or violent. It was quiet, relentless, and deeply unsettling. But Elijah was also a man burdened by the weight of his mission. The ledger was more than a document. It was a ledger of pain, loss, and the unyielding quest for justice. He carried the ghosts of those who had suffered under the system he sought to dismantle, and their voices drove him forward. The nights were long, filled with danger and uncertainty. Every visit to a conspirator's home was a test of courage and strategy. One wrong move could mean exposure, capture, or death. Yet Elijah's resolve never faltered. He was driven by something stronger than fear, a vision of a world where truth was not buried and justice was not for sale. As the ledger's power grew, so too did the tension among the conspirators. Their fragile silence was breaking, and whispers of Elijah's deeds spread through the county like wildfire. Fear turned to paranoia, and paranoia to desperation. They knew that the man who could enter any house at night was not just a slave. He was a reckoning, and the reckoning was coming. As Elijah's quiet revolution gained momentum, the weight of the ledger's truth pressed heavier on everyone involved. The conspirators could no longer ignore the fractures spreading through their alliance. Trust dissolved into suspicion, and fear birthed paranoia. Every shadow held a potential enemy. Every knock at the door might be Elijah himself. Elijah's nightly visits became more than acts of defiance. They were declarations of inevitable change. He was no longer just a man in the shadows. He had become a force tearing at the fabric of a corrupt system. The plantation owner's power, once absolute and unquestioned, was now riddled with cracks. But Elijah's burden was immense. The ledger was a torch that illuminated horrors the world refused to see, and carrying it meant living under a constant threat. He knew the danger was escalating, and the risk was no longer just his own life. It was the lives of everyone who believed in justice. The slaves whispered his name in hushed reverence. To them, Elijah was more than a symbol. He was hope incarnate. Yet Elijah understood that hope was fragile. It could be snuffed out with a single betrayal or a misstep in this deadly game of shadows. But he was determined. For every secret exposed, for every lie dismantled, he was closer to breaking the chains. Not just his own, but those of generations shackled by greed and silence. The final reckoning was approaching. The ledger was no longer hidden. Its truth was spreading like wildfire, threatening to consume everything the conspirators had built. Their time was running out. The night Elijah disappeared, the county held its breath. No one knew if he had been caught, if he had been killed, or if he had vanished into the dark with the ledger still clutched in his hands. But his absence was a signal, the end of a chapter and the beginning of something far greater. In the days that followed, the carefully constructed world of the plantation owners began to unravel. Secrets long buried surfaced like ghosts. Whispered accusations turned into open confrontations, and the once untouchable conspirators found themselves ensnared in a web of their own making. Elijah's legacy was not in his capture or survival, but in the power of the truth he wielded. The ledger he carried became a beacon, a warning that no empire built on lies and cruelty can stand forever. And for those who dared to listen, Elijah's story was a lesson etched in the darkest corners of history. True power lies not in chains or wealth, but in knowledge, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Some say Elijah still walks at night, a ghost beyond chains, carrying secrets no one was ever meant to hear. His footsteps echo through time, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, a single spark can ignite a revolution.